Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Denisha Jones, and I am one of the co-directors for Defending the Early Years. And today is day one of our 2021 Summer Virtual Institute. We hope you'll enjoy listening to some lovely children's music as we kick off our three-day event. We began the Institute this is the third one, so 3 years ago in Washington, D.C., as an opportunity to work with some of our early childhood advocates, teachers, and families to really build an equitable early childhood future. Last year, we went virtual because of COVID, and this year we're continuing with the virtual event because we know that we can reach so many people this way. We've changed things a little bit this year. We're going to have a couple keynotes on day one and day three, followed by a panel of our closest, some of our friends and colleagues who are doing this work to share their insights with you. Day two, we're going to have two really informative talks with some of our colleagues on play and advocacy. So we invite you to join us for what we hope will be 3 days of really inspiring folks to remember that we are stronger together and that we use our voice for advocacy for young children. I am going to now introduce our wonderful founder and co-founder and executive director, co-founder and president of Defending the Early Years, Nancy Carlson Page.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Really thrilled we're having this institute and that so many people from so many different places can you hear me? That so many people from many faraway places can join us, which is one kind of unintended positive effect of a pandemic that's caused so much difficulty for so many people. As Denisha said, I'm one of the people who founded Defending the Early Years. Why did we do that? Because in 2012 and a couple of years before that, we were developing this increasing sense of alarm about what was happening in the early childhood field, because I'm sure many of you know, maybe all of you know, the very swift education reform movement that swept through the United States and many countries around the world that focused on data-driven education and accountability and standards was revolutionizing the education system everywhere, but it started to push down into early childhood, and we began to see this focus on academic skills, this focus on standards, and this increasing requirement for children to learn certain skills at certain times, to learn the same skill at one time, which is of course not how young kids learn. So we brought together leaders from the field of education. I think the alarm a lot of us felt at that time was a result of the Common Core state standards that first got adopted in 2010. And those were backwards mapped from high school down to kindergarten, but they identified, in the case of kindergartners, more than 90 specific skills they were to have accomplished by the time they finished their kindergarten year. So the effect of the Common Core, it was fueled very much by big money, lots of money, and it affected policy because it was tied to so much money. And one would ask, why is it that a billionaire, Bill Gates in this case, can influence education policy to this extent? That's worth thinking about. Anyway, it was happening. And we saw these standards get pushed down to kindergarten in the Common Core, and then other preschool standards getting developed by states sort of in the same vein of identifying specific academic skills that kids should be accomplishing by the end of each school year, even starting in preschool. So we brought together early childhood educators from around the country because we felt like we had to have a stronger voice and we needed to organize with other leaders to be able to do that. We shared the same perspective about young children and how they learn. We all know from the field that we're in and the background we have that young kids learn through activity, through play, through interaction with other kids and teachers, through activity centers and interaction with materials and others. and that they don't all learn the same thing at the same time. And we felt that we could get that message out more strongly if we could organize and deliver that with a stronger voice, which we certainly have. We also always had it in the forefront of our mission, an understanding that even though our focus is on quality early childhood education, play-based quality education, we all understand that we're in a system in the United States with systemic inequalities. We have racial injustice, we have economic injustice, and some children come to preschool or kindergarten with many more advantages than others. The United States, it's abysmal, but of all developed countries, we have the highest child poverty rate. So unless we address these issues of inequality and racial injustice in the United States, we're never going to see kids come to kindergarten or preschool from a fair and even playing field, if you will. So we do understand there's also a really puny social safety net in this country that's ridiculous compared to other developed nations and how they support children and families. So that's been a large part of our agenda all along. And even though the Biden administration now is putting money into early childhood, which is wonderful, but it's always been true that you can't correct social economic injustices through education. You have to address them at a more systemic level that gets at the underlying reasons they exist. So that's always part of our agenda, to promote quality education for young kids, but at the same time see a more just and economic system that's more beneficial to all people than what we currently have. Also, we've been a little worried about how the new administration may address the inequalities. And there's been a trend to really push this skill-based education more onto low-income Black and brown children. And we've seen such inequalities in preschool because kids from wealthier families can go to private schools that offer wonderful play-based education. So this is an issue in the forefront of our minds as well. We've tried to stay current, given this is our major mission. We've also tried to stay current with the changing times, the social issues that are going on around us that affect families and affect children. So when the pandemic occurred, we were fortunate that one of our advisors, Dr. Susan Lin, who's a child psychologist and an ace ventriloquist, was able to work with us to make 2 videos with her puppet, who becomes so real to us. We think of her as a person at this point, but her name is Audrey and she's a duck. And we made 2 videos where Audrey asked a lot of questions about the pandemic, and those are on our website. We have a terrific website, by the way, with all of these wonderful advisors that we have and all of the materials we've written and disseminated over these years since we've existed, getting close to 9 now, that you can download. They're always free. Disseminate them widely as best you can. Anyway, Susan, Lynn, and Audrey helped us, fashion messages. Well, they did it, but with a little bit of our support, to address the concerns about the pandemic. And then after the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, we made another video with Dr. Lynn and Audrey addressing Audrey's questions. She's around 5 years old, about why people were protesting. And that's also on our website. And that was something we thought through really carefully. Hopefully you'll get a chance to look at these. And we're working on another one that's going to address Audrey's concerns about going back to school or starting school for the first time if she was home in the pandemic. The idea being these videos are very short, but they're a way to kind of open the door for dialogue between parents and kids or teachers in a classroom of children. So hopefully those will be resources for you. I think right now I would be very honored to introduce you to Susan and Audrey because they're here at the Institute and they want to welcome you and talk to you about being here. So, hey, hi, you guys.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Nancy Carlson Page.
Hi, Audrey. I've missed you.
I'm not Audrey. I'm Dr. Lynn.
Oh, really? You got long braids.
No, she's the duck. I'm the person.
She's
Audrey, I think Nancy can tell the difference between, a person and a puppet.
Even a puppet like me? Nancy said she thought I was a person.
That was a compliment.
Sorry, it might not be.
I don't want to tell you. I don't want to disillusion her if she thinks I'm a person.
She knows that you're a puppet, Audrey, but Nancy is very good at pretending.
She is?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why she's so wonderful with children is because she's so good at pretending. And then when she's pretending, it just seems like you're a person.
But I'm not a person.
No.
I'm a puppet.
That's right.
And I'm here today to talk about defending the early years. You told me we were going to talk about DEY.
About DEY?
Yes, so I thought we were going to talk about sunshine, and clouds and doing things.
No, it's not that kind of DEY. It's DEY, defending the early years, which is really, really, really important.
Well, who are they defending them from?
They're defending them from people who somehow, for all sorts of different reasons, don't seem to think that children should be children. They kind of think that they should be like little adults. Maybe they should just go to school and just sit, and that people can just give them things to learn.
You mean like open up their heads and pour knowledge in it?
Yes, something like that, maybe. Not exactly open up their heads.
But I think that children should go to school and just sit. And I think that they should just get worksheets and that they should just be told things.
Audrey, that's a terrible thing for you to say right now. Do you really think that? Oh no, Nancy. Oh dear, Denise, I'm so sorry. Really? Why?
Because then they'll be more like me.
They'll be more like you.
They'll be puppets. They'll be puppets. That's what will happen. And people will just get them to do anything and they won't ever know how to think. And that means I'll have puppets like me.
Yeah, but Audrey, they're not puppets. They're children. They're living, breathing human beings, and they learn by doing things and by figuring things out and by playing and by actively engaging in the world around them.
Puppets don't do that.
No.
Puppets do what people just always make them do.
That's right.
Can I be a child?
We can pretend that you're a child.
Just like Nancy Carlson Page was pretending.
Nancy Carlson Page loves you a lot, Audrey.
And I love her too.
And there's somebody else here who you love as well.
Who is that?
Can you guess?
Is it Denisha?
It is. Denisha's here.
Denisha!
Hi, Audrey.
Hi, Denisha. I'm so happy to see you. Do you think that I'm a person too?
I person sometimes when we have very long conversations. I feel like I'm talking to a person, Audrey, but I do know you're a puppet, but I'm going to treat you like a child. How's that?
That would be good because you treat children so good
So well,
and good.
well and good, both.
Yes, and when and Denisha helps me think about things that are very hard to think about sometimes.
She does.
And Denisha and I went to a protest together.
You did, that's right.
It was exciting, and I did that.
And you know what? Denisha is going to be introducing somebody else whom you know and who you really like a lot, and she really likes you too.
Who is that?
I'm going to let Denisha tell everybody actually about who our first speaker is going to be.
Okay. All right. Does that mean I have to be quiet now?
Yes, it does.
And because I'm a puppet, I have to do it, right?
Yes,
But you don't have to do it.
I'm going to do it because it's polite and it's the right thing to do. That's why I'm doing it.
I'm doing it because you're making me.
Unfortunately, that's true.
Take it away, Denisha.
Thanks, Audrey, and thank you, Susan, so much for getting us started for the Institute. It's always great when we can talk to our friend Audrey and hear what's going on in her fun life and her struggle from puppet to child. Thank you so much. All right, as we mentioned earlier, we are going to start off day one with a keynote discussion, with a keynote presentation that'll then lead to a panel discussion. So I'd like to first introduce our keynote speaker is Kathy Hirsch-Pasaic, and I hope I said that correctly. Kathy is the Stanley and Deborah Lefkowitz Faculty Fellow in the Department of Psychology at Temple University and a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Kathy is the author of 14 books on children's learning, most notably Einstein Never Used Flashcards, How Children Can Really Learn and Why They Need to Play, and why they need to play more and memorize less. And her recent book, Becoming Brilliant, What the Science Tells Us About Raising Successful Children, and hundreds of publications as well. She's committed to translating current work in the science of learning for professional and lay audiences. And to that end, she's pioneered global initiatives like Playful Learning Landscapes. I'm very excited to welcome Kathy to give our keynote about what we can take away about learning after this pandemic, and then our panelists will follow up with that discussion. So thank you for joining us, Kathy.
Well, thank you so much, Denise, and thank you, Nancy. And Audrey, I think you're a real child, and I have for years. So don't worry about it. You will be my friend no matter what. And hi, Susan. Okay, well, today I want to tell you a story about the ultimate playbook for reimagining early education. And of course, it has to start with once upon a time. Once upon a time, Nancy Page knew I was going to start this way because she already talked about play, because she already told you where I was going, but here we go. Once upon a time, educators and learning scientists asked what school would be like if we could teach in the way that human brains learned. Well, this talk is going to tell you that story. The first thing I just want to highlight is those of you out there who are defending the early years and who are part of this wonderful organization, I hope you know how critically important you are for preparing young children and for preparing young brains. In fact, a wonderful paper came out just a couple of weeks ago with Martha Farah and her team at the University of Pennsylvania. And they re-looked at that way old Abecedarian project that you might recall. And they were looking at that with now 38 and 39-year-olds. That's how old the kids are. And some of them, as you know, had really enriched early childhood like what you're giving your children, and some didn't. And what did they find when they looked at the brain structure and the brain functioning? Well, those kids who had the really strong early childhood education that was really of high quality, they're the ones that had stronger, bigger, better connected brain structures. Wow, amazing. You're actually changing structure and function? Of course you are. And you're helping children succeed. And if you read some of what's been coming out in the New York Times recently, you know that you're supporting the economy of the United States too, and the economies around the world. When people had to quit their jobs because of COVID, and there was no one to help take care of the children in a way that we could all trust, what happened is many stores closed because women weren't in the workforce. So I just want to start by saying congratulations. You have one of the most important jobs in the entire world. And I want everyone to recognize how important your jobs are. So today, I want to share the equation for supporting high quality early learning, much of which you're already doing, by explaining the science of how children learn. And I will indeed argue that that's through playful learning. And by explaining the science of what children need to learn, which I'll define as a breadth of skills, not just sitting down and pouring things into empty heads. No, Audrey, it isn't that. And if you take the how and the what, we'll have happier teachers and students, and we'll also have better outcomes without any extra burden on teachers. Well, how could that work? The story unfolds through 4 chapters. In chapter 1, I briefly want to say what you already know. It's been a heck of a tough year. Chapter 2, let's change the lens, a new mindset. Chapter 3, using the equation in schools and in communities. And I want to show you how we've been doing that. And chapter 4, porting the equation into your classroom. So let's take a minute. We have just made it through a really tough year. Well, the teachers say it best themselves. As one woman from Fargo, North Dakota said, the levels of stress is exponentially higher. It's like nothing I've ever experienced before. Or how about, I'm tired of looking at a screen. Actually, I'm tired in general. I need the summer. I just want to recharge. The COVID factor has been huge. Where are we now? Well, there were a lot of closures, as you know. And it wasn't even until late May that some states required in-person instruction. So we've been back and forth in this hybrid model that isn't working for the youngest kids at all. And many kids just dropped out. They didn't even enroll. What can we expect? Well, we're going to have much more variability than we have ever had in the school classroom when we go back in September. Our kids have been stretched in their attention skills. In one study that we did in our lab, for example, we asked, well, I should ask you, how long do you think a child can really sit in front of a screen and attend? We've been trying to do half-hour lessons, and in our research, it appears that it's only 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops. Oh yeah, there's some who can do it, but it's hard. A lot of kids are going to be anxious with other mental health challenges. And of course, Nancy's already referred to the exacerbated inequality that we're going to face. Some people put a nice tag on it, the K-shaped recovery. But the truth is, a lot of kids are going to need us, and they're going to need us really bad. Now, the question is, maybe, just maybe, this is precisely the opportunity that we kind of needed to rethink education, not to just do same old, but to change the mindset of the way we've been looking at our classrooms, and to help our principals in our school districts see that just shoving more factoids in isn't going to do the job, and that's not going to prepare our children for the future. As one teacher said from Oakland, California, as we end the school year with more and more students attending school in person, maybe we have a chance to make good out of a bad year. Let's look at what worked. Teacher solidarity, family communication, and joy. I want to take a moment on that last 2 words. And joy. we've got to find a way to love it again. So I want to give you a little bit of a test on trying a new lens. Okay, ready? All I want you to do is follow what I do. Your turn. Oh, I can see most of you got that. Most of you got that. Stay on rhythm. And I'll say to you, what did you hear? Now change the lens. It wasn't just clapping. It turns out, that when you repeated, you actually had to listen. Oh yeah, did I forget to tell you, music is math and division. So when you're doing rhythm, you're actually cutting time. And if I were to sing it to you, you'd actually have relations of high and low. Wait a minute. Am I saying that a drum circle? Am I saying that clapping games actually can teach amazing skills to young children? All right, I'm going to give you one more clapping game. Now, this time what I'm going to do, instead of following me, when I clap once, you clap twice. But when I clap twice, you clap once. Is everybody with me? Sure you got it? Okay, remember, I clap once, you're twice. I clap twice, you do once. Here we go. Ah! Okay, you felt it. You felt that moment where you weren't quite sure what to do. That's called executive function skills. That's called impulse control. And you just felt it right there when you were doing a clapping game and you thought it was just a clapping game. All right, let's look at this. What in the world could we possibly make out of this artwork by Marley, who's 24 months? I mean, come on, shmush, right? In fact, it's such shmush that many teachers are embarrassed to send this home to parents. And what they do is they take the cutout tree with the cutout apple and they put the cutout apple on the cutout tree. No, let's change the lens. Because when I look at this more closely, even from a 2-year-old, come on, this over here required intent. That kid was an artist. She kept her pen down so that she could draw laboriously those circles. And hey, she could have done dabs without doing the color, right? She chose different color to do those dabs. And she did it by making patterns with alignment and spatial sense, intent, hand control, and content. Wait a minute. 2-year-old art has more to it than smush? That's incredible. You mean there's a liberal arts education going on even where I haven't seen it? Yes, that's precisely what I mean. And in our book, Becoming Brilliant, and in a piece that we wrote last September with the Brookings Institution, A New Path to Education Reform, we're really suggesting that maybe it's time to look more carefully, to change the lens on the way we think about how kids learn, and importantly, how we're defining success for young children. So which of these definitions of success sounds better to you? The traditional way. In school, we are preparing children for outcomes. They are to learn how to read, how to write, and how to do math. And so in our classrooms, we are going to teach them letter-sound correspondence and decoding skills. Well, okay. Here's option 2, the 21st century way. We are supporting children to include but go beyond content, to be happy, healthy, thinking, caring, and social, so they become collaborative, creative, competent, and responsible citizens of tomorrow. I ask you now, what do you want for your kids? And ask your parents the same question. What do you want for your kids when you exit our school? Well, believe it or not, the scientific evidence suggests that the way you learn best and the way you reach that second 21st century definition of success is through playful learning. And this list doesn't begin to capture it. It's only a partial list of all the work that's been done in playful learning. And so you should be asking me, well, what do you mean by playful learning? Well, for us, we mean both free play, whether it's objects, fantasy, make-believe, it's pleasurable, it has no extrinsic goals, it's spontaneous, it's all engrossing, it can have a private reality, and it can contain, but doesn't need to have make-believe. And it includes not just free play, but something important that we come up with that we call guided play, which is active, not passive. It's engaging, not distracting. It's meaningful, not disjointed. It's socially interactive, generally not solo. It's iterative, it changes each time you come to it, like a cardboard box. And it's fun. And it has a learning goal associated with it. And it can come in a number of different forms, like a planned play environment that's enriched with objects and toys that provide experiential learning, infused with some content. Think a children's museum, a Montessori education, or indeed your classroom. It can also come from the guide at the side, not the sage on the stage, the guide on the side, an adult who's enhancing children's exploration by co-playing with kids, asking those open-ended questions, not the one right answer questions. Gee, what do you think we could do with this Lego block? And suggesting ways to explore materials that kids might not think of. But importantly, in guided and free play, the child takes the lead. Let's look at it in another way. Playful learning can come in 4 boxes, in 4 different packages, initiated by or directed by. So if it's initiated by the child and it's directed by the child, we call it free play. So let's imagine you're building that fort in the living room. The kid decides they're building a fort. It's directed by the child. And you all know what happens when parents come in and take over. Not a good scene. Now let's go to initiated by the child, but the adult comes in. We call that co-opted play. You've seen it, right? The child is drawing something gorgeous, and the adult comes in and says something like they did in Le Petit Prince. Oh, you drew a hat. Devastated. The child says, no, it wasn't a hat. No. It was a boa constrictor who swallowed an elephant. That's co-opted play. What about initiated by an adult, in that the adult sets up the room? But who's going to direct within the environment? The child. That's guided play. And if it's initiated by an adult and directed by an adult, even though people are saying post-COVID, this is what you need to do more of. No. Please stop doing that. It's direct instruction. It's not good for kids. All right, another way to look at it is our paper suggests that play might actually exist on a spectrum. So you have free play initiated by the child, directed by the child, no explicit learning goal. Guided play changes where the direction is by the child and it does have a goal. Games where there is indeed a goal, the adult might pull out the game, but it's directed by the child and direct instruction. All right, now the question before us is, can we turn free play into guided play? So here I've adopted a sausage machine to help us tell that story. In free play, we dump the blocks in front of the kids. By the way, that's a part of what we want from playful learning, just giving them time to have the dump, right? And to play. But if we want, we can also create something where they have spatial learning over here by suggesting, let's build a castle. We don't tell them what the castle has to look like. The castle doesn't have to have cruntulations. It doesn't have to have a moat, but it does have to have active, engaged, meaningful, social, joyful, plus a learning goal. Then it ends up showing us the spatial relations of let's build a castle, because it adds that reflective component. One more example, please. Here's a child climbing a pole up to the playground. That's a perfectly wonderful thing to do. But if we wanted to put it through the grinder and make it playful learning, all we need to do is add hatchets. Please excuse me for the terrible hatchets. I couldn't make the line small enough. But If we put the hatchets on the pole, that child now comes back and says, I climbed all the way up to number 3. Do you see the difference? The kid's bragging about getting so far is using number skills and is still controlling the dynamic. Now, playful learning helps us reach the definition of success that we talked about through what I call the 6 C's. How to thrive in a 21st century world. Let's just look at them as the what of learning. Our kids need to know how to get along. Relationships are at the core of all learning in developmental psychology in our science. Communication is built on collaboration. We don't communicate if we have no one to collaborate with, to talk to. Turns out you can't learn content without communicating and collaborating. Critical thinking is built on content, as is creative innovation, as is confidence, where we put grit and growth mindset. But it also includes in confidence, kids have to learn from failure. Let's just look at a couple of them because they're straight from the scientific literature. Some kids do it all on their own. They don't even look at who's beside them. They don't even care. Then there's the side-by-siders. We call that parallel play. Then there's the back and forth. I do it, then you do it, then I add a piece, then you do, where we decide to build the castle together. Now, by the way, this is not just for kids. It's us too. Do we have our own way of doing our own classroom? Or are we kind of collaborating at least back and forth or build it together with other teachers in our school? And let's look at critical thinking. Seeing is believing moves to truths differ. Okay, I guess you have your truth and I have my truth, but my truth is right. Moving to opinions, moving to evidence. Now, let me tell you where we fail. Where we fail is that we put too much of an emphasis here without looking at the whole picture. And I don't have time to go through this in exquisite detail, but let me give you one quick example from reading. If we start by teaching reading by giving lists of vocabulary words, the kids aren't going to remember those vocabulary words any better than you remember learning ubiquitous when you memorized your SAT words for college. Remember that word, guys? Now, it turns out there's a reason why. Because content doesn't just come for free. It comes because we have strong language skills. And reading is parasitic on or built on our language skills. And our language skills don't come unless we have back and forth dialogue. So ask yourself for a moment, how much dialogue do you have in your classroom? Are you having conversations? When you're sitting in circle time, are you just reading that book? Or are you talking about it? Are you acting it? Are you going beyond the covers of the book? And then, do you build such strong communication that you can point out some of those words so it has deeper meaning and is built on a world of knowledge? Because when it is, kids can build their own books through creative imagination with the same characters, can do critical thinking, and can even learn to persist in creating something because they'll dare to fail. The 6 C's. Now, it turns out that when you put the how and the what together, you get a kind of checklist for optimal learning. You can ask yourself, is the activity that I have in my classroom fun or is it boring? Is it something that's active or is it passive? Engaging, meaningful, socially interactive? And what is the profile of skills that I'm trying to put together for my kids? Does it require them to work together? And if so, how? Does it require them to have dialogue and tell a joint story? Does it require them to make connections beyond the cover of the book with the blocks that they have, with the characters that they have? Can they do critical thinking? You may be doubting here that kids have critical thinking, but I wanted to give you a great example of where they do. One day, I was talking to my son who said to me, Mom, do all vehicles have wheels? And I thought for a while and I said, well, a lot of vehicles have wheels. He was, I think, 4 at the time. And I said, but not all. I said, boats don't have wheels. There was silence in the house. My son got up off the couch and he went upstairs and he came back not but 2 minutes later. And he said to me, Mom, look. And he opened up the Babar book. And it was a scene where Babar had given Zephyr a boat, but to get the boat to the lake, he had taken the boat on a trailer. And guess what? The trailer had wheels. Josh looked at the evidence and he decided, therefore, that all vehicles have wheels. So you can get critical thinking, even from little people. You put the how together with the what, and you get the ultimate playbook for reimagining education. So let's take a look at 2 schools that have put this system in place. The first school is the Westchester district outside of Philadelphia. It's a kindergarten school. And what you see over here is this little girl is telling us about the weather for the day on the weather board. Now she's just in one little area, and as she does that, they all leave the circle time and go to their stations. And I go to one area where there's 3 kids, one who has a cardboard box and is going essentially like this on the shoebox. I have no idea what this child is doing, but the child is facing another child who's standing in front of a map of the United States, and another kid is copiously taking scribbles. I would have said notes, but they weren't really notes. They were scribbles. So I said to the kids, oh my gosh, what are you doing? And the kid who was going like this said, shh, I'm filming the weather report. Oh, said I. They're doing the theme of weather in the kindergarten schools in this entire school. What happened next was amazing to me. The child in front of the map got into her posture, and she showed me how there was a frontal system coming from California, and it was moving east. And because of the low pressure system, we could expect precipitation in 3 days. Now I want you to think about this for a minute. She talked about the system moving east, and she moved in the right direction, east-west. I call that STEM. Anybody else call it STEM? Oh, wait, I think she used the word forecast. That sounded like a fancy vocab word to me. Did she use high pressure, low pressure system? What is she talking about? Precipitation? All right, that's fancier vocabulary than I would expect from a kindergarten student. Over here, the kids then got circles of different circumferences, and they had a little dropper, and they were to see how many drops of water it took to fill the area of the circle. And then they graphed it. Does that not sound like mathematics to you? So by taking a theme for the school year, well, not for the whole year, they changed themes every 2 weeks. Turns out at the end of the year, these kids all did better on the standard reading at grade level. They did better on their math scores. They had fewer referrals for OT. They had 79% fewer referrals for special education. And when we interviewed the teachers, they said, oh my God, we're much happier than we have ever been teaching kindergarten in our life. Why? Because they were in a playful classroom. They were using the how and what of children's learning. Let's go to the Godfrey Lee Public Schools in Michigan. Well, it probably won't work here, you say, because it's a small community school district in Michigan, pre-K through 12. Nearly 80% of the students are Hispanic. 93% of the students face economic challenges, and the study was done with kindergarten to 3rd grade students. But we did the same thing, and these kids are preparing something to take to the marketplace. It may not look that way to you, but they worked really, really hard. And guess what? They got the stories about what to take to market from their families, because they brought it home with them, because there was more parent child communication and school child communication. What happened when we tested it? Increased positive experiences for teachers and students, increased classroom 21st century skills, and gains in standard reading and math scores. Wait a minute, they're doing better in collaboration, communication, and in content, and in critical thinking. How is this possible? So we decided to also try it by taking education outside of schools. And we're looking at how to build opportunities in public spaces. And we call this initiative Playful Learning Landscapes. One of our first was in supermarkets. I mean, supermarkets. Could you put signage in supermarkets? Did you know? Grocery stores are not just for buying food. There's learning in those aisles. And meet Andy the apple. And here you see that you can put up signs like, here's a cow. Hey, hey, turns out cows do milk. What else do cows do? See the open-ended question? Well, maybe parents would start talking when they saw that their kids were engaged with the cow. And in fact, they did. In under-resourced environments, we got a 33% increase in caregiver child language when the signs were up than when the signs were down. And one of our colleagues from the University of Pittsburgh did a replication with math and STEM scores and got the same thing. And now we're doing this throughout stores in Santa Ana, California. Example 2, empowered. We went to urban thinkscapes. Could we maybe transform a bus stop outside Philadelphia? Well, we met with the community and we said, would you like us to work with you on this? And they said, you bet. There was a plot of land. It was the plot of land where Martin Luther King had given one of his first speeches in the Freedom March. They wanted it there. And instead of just doing a bench, we built puzzles outside of the bench. And the puzzles could have Martin Luther King or other puzzles that did other spatial patterns. And we wanted to see if by putting a number of these different features into this little area, we could change parent-child behavior. Well, we did. The number of families with 6 or more conversational turns increased by 39% from pre to post test. And I should tell you this, that we hired members of the community to be our data ambassadors so that people could be employed in this as well. 35% more families at Urban Thinkscape had 6 or more conversational turns than families at a control playground. It turns out they were talking about spatial, like maybe it fits here, that doesn't match. Can you move this here? And also color and letter language. This was an amazing intervention that got people, parents and children engaged together. Finally, I want to share with you Fractionball, which was one of our newer ones. We literally went out with a can of paint, and we repainted a basketball court. If kids are having trouble learning fractions, well, by gosh, let's make it easy. This was an under-resourced school, 3rd grade in Philadelphia, now replicated in Santa Ana. This is the 3-point line is now a 1-point line. Over here is a 3/4 point line. Over here is a half line. Throw the ball and see if you can add up to 5 3/4. Can you add up and not go over 7? How did they do? Well, it turns out in just 2 weeks, 4 times a week, the kids in 2nd and 3rd grade came into their classroom and all of a sudden they were doing fraction decimal conversion. And the teacher said to us, how in the world did they possibly learn that? We've been trying to teach that to them for weeks. The answer is, if you use playful learning and you teach the way the brain learns, the how and what of learning, kids can learn. Well, you can do this too. Use the checklist to reimagine your classroom. Take any activity that you're thinking about and ask yourself, where do I stand? Did I make this fun? Did I make it active? Or are they sitting there? Is it engaging? Is it meaningful to them? Does it have any cultural relevance to them? And what are they learning? Are they learning how to work together, to communicate and have dialogue, to have the content, the critical thinking? Are they learning to be creative? And what does your classroom look like? Is it designed to bring out these skills or not? And how is your school providing the opportunity for all the classrooms to grow in this area? Because it takes the kind of support from the principal on down. And if you put these two together and you think this out, you too can take any theme or anything you're already doing and reimagine education through playful learning and what we are currently calling the ultimate playbook. You see, COVID maybe gave us an amazing opportunity to teach like brains learn and to reimagine education for our time. So we're trying to put together now a way for all of you to join us and be the next school in line. If you're interested, come and we'll put together a training program and work with you so it's culturally relevant, variable, and more accessible to all of your kids. Come to the ultimate playbook.org and you'll see how we're thinking about doing this, and we will build it with you. I want to thank you all and thank my collaborators and our funders, because they're the people who really made it happen. I have the most wonderful postdoc, graduate students and undergrads, and a collaborator for over 40 years, Roberta Galenkoff. And I want to thank all of you, because it takes teachers and providers who support children and families. And together, I honestly think we can reimagine what education looks like for our time. I think this is our moment to create a movement. Education can be more accessible, it can be more fun, it can enhance student outcomes, and importantly, I think it can build equity, but it's up to us to make that happen. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks again, Nancy, for inviting me to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that wonderful keynote. That is an excellent way for us to get everything started. I mean, I talk about play all day, but this was just really great to see how you're doing it in the schools and the communities, and really tracking it and to show people the value, you know. And yeah, I'm a big proponent of free play, but I like this focus on guided play too. I think that's important to think about what's happening in the classroom. I'd very much like guided play in the classroom than teacher directed instruction, no play, right? I think we need to remind people that that's a valuable tool, because as much as we want free play, I do believe in free play all day. I know we're not going to get that, right? So how do we start? And that guided play sounds like a really interesting way to kind of get that going. So just want to thank you so much. And now we're going to bring in our panelists to get their response to your wonderful keynote. And so I'm going to introduce the three of our panelists and then ask them each to provide brief remarks. Then I will float some questions to the whole group and we'll talk about those. And we'll also have time for audience questions. So you can use the Q&A function to submit an audience question, and we will get to those towards the end of our second hour together. So one of our first panelists is Dr. Kaliris Salas Ramirez. She is a professor and distinguished medical lecturer at CUNY School of Medicine. Dr. Salas teaches neuroscience, endocrinology, human reproduction, and practice of medicine. She conducts research on sex-specific interventions for cognitive decline as a result of illicit or therapeutic drug exposure, with a particular interest in developmental exposure to drugs, neuroplasticity, and efficacy of treatment interventions. She has also published multiple peer-reviewed papers on her work in journals like Neuroscience, Physiology and Behavior, Molecular Neurobiology, in addition to several book chapters on sexual behavior, sex, and gender. Dr. Salas aspires to use her platform as a neuroscientist, Puerto Rican woman and mother to support anti-oppressive work and changing systems for equity and racial and social justice. I've had the pleasure of knowing Kaliris and working with her, organizing with Black Lives Matter at School in New York City for the past couple of years, and watching her just be an awesome advocate for anti-racism work with her students in medical school and with her young children in New York City public schools as well too. In addition, we have Wendy Cole, director of Maple Street School, a progressive anti-racist cooperative play-based preschool in Brooklyn, New York. Wendy is a play revolutionary as the founder of a racial and social justice conference and series for early childhood educators, Little Chairs, Big Differences, where she learns and leads at the same time. Wendy is committed to dismantling white supremacist culture, beginning with herself. Wendy is also a founder in the Brooklyn Coalition of Early Childhood Programs, a coalition dedicated to policy advocacy and mutual support, made up and led by diverse early childhood program leaders in Brooklyn. I was fortunate to visit Maple Street School during their Black Lives Matter School Week of Action and saw the amazing work that the teachers and Wendy are doing with the children. And I'm so excited. And I got to speak at Little Chairs, Big Differences. So I'm very excited to have Wendy here. And last but not least, we are so excited to have Geraldine Bywater McLaughlin, co-teacher leader at Mission Hill School, a K-8 pilot public school in Boston, Massachusetts, that has embraced the concept of educating the whole child, mind, body, and spirit, focusing on the academic, intellectual, artistic, social, emotional, and civic growth of each child. Geraldine is a veteran educator with over 30 years experience in early childhood education, contributing to many education-focused publications like Rethinking Schools and Community Playthings monthly blog. She was the founder of Empowered by Play and is currently on the DEY board of directors as treasurer. And we are so delighted to have Geraldine back with us with DEY leadership and also speaking with here today. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with Caleres, and we're just going to ask for your thoughts on this whole idea of really rethinking education. So the whole idea of our panel for day one was making a play on we're trying to do away with the language around learning loss, right? None of us are here believing in that limited deficit thinking, but this idea of learning leverage, right? Planning for better than returning to normal. And we just heard some amazing research about how we can change things and we can do things differently. And I know you all bring different expertise. Caleres is a working mother and scholar, all of you working mothers, right? But also a scholar raising young children, an active leader, teacher working together, and a director of a socially just preschool program. So we really want to just hear the different perspectives on this whole idea. So we'll turn it over to Caleres.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Denisha. Thoroughly enjoyed those keynote addresses. And Denisha's right. I am a neuroscientist by training. Have studied development, predominantly adolescents, through most of my career. And I have two little ones. And I can say that because of the work that I do in my laboratory, because of understanding how the brain develops and how we learn, and how important emotions are, understanding how we've moved towards problem-based learning exercises and inquiry-based learning in medical education. I wanted my son, my oldest, when he first started school, to have the same experience. And so I have chosen Central Park East 1 Elementary School as his school. You know, there's nothing like a school that upholds the principles of progressive pedagogical practices. It was founded by Deborah Meyer. And I can tell you the teachers in our school are very committed to maintaining progressive education. It's not something they negotiate with. And so a lot of the things that I'm hearing about today from Dr. Hirsch are definitely things that I saw my son experience. And I saw him blossom into this creative, innovative thinker. It's interesting because as time has progressed, he's actually leaning more towards nonfiction and is very committed to facts, but that might be because his mom is a scientist. But he is capable of having these really in-depth conversations. It was interesting how he at 4 could have conversations about emotions, even though he was trying to figure out his space in life. He would want to talk about it in a complicated way, and he would do it through play. So it was a lot easier for me to have a conversation about his feelings and how his day was if I would ask him about work time, which is central to progressive schools. And so it's an opportunity for children to spend some time in a classroom and actually choosing what they want to engage in order to do their work. And work time is something that's another non-negotiable at Central Park East 1. It's how children begin their day, and they have the opportunity to engage with other learners as well as with their teachers who play roles as facilitators rather than imposing ideas on them, as Audrey was telling us about earlier on. And so he had the ability to engage in that work and whatever kind of work he wanted. And I will say he really enjoyed dry sand over lots of other areas in the classroom. But it was like our talking piece from very early on. We do the same thing with doctors and medical education. And so for me, it's seeing that continuum and the ability that play can have in learning environments for all people. Again, because that's the optimal experience for us to be able to engage in having the opportunity to integrate information into our brains and consolidate it so that we can retrieve that information later on and use it for different things that it applies for. And so play is absolutely central in our household, in my son's education, but also my students. And so I try to it's interesting, I always say that Central Park East 1 has been transformative, not just for him, but also for me as an educator, because it's really pushed the way that I think, how I engage with my own students in the classroom. And I've had an opportunity to teach every age group from early teens to late 20s, early 30s. So, and still bring in those principles that I believe are absolutely transformative in the way that we can engage with the people that we educate. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing that. We're going to talk more about that. And people are asking about Central Park East 1. Is it a high scope setting? I don't know. You might know that.
No, it used to be as a high school. So it used to, Geraldine, what? I didn't see the comment.
Oh, the question was, is it a high scope setting? No. Yeah. No, and you explained it a little bit. It was founded by Deb Meyer and the work that she was doing about bringing progressive schools to urban areas with, diverse parents, high levels of Black and Latinx parents. And so we're glad that they're still doing. And I'll drop the link in the chat so people can see more about the website and see more about the school. All right, and now we're going to go to Geraldine.
Hello. So speaking of Deborah Meyer, I'm one of the co-teacher leaders at a public school in Boston, also a progressive public school. They do exist. And I am one of the co-teacher leaders. So we are a school that doesn't have a principal. So # teacher-powered schools, it's a thing. And we have 3-year-olds up to 8th graders. And so when Kathy was showing the PowerPoint with the school and kids were there without masks and they were playing, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like it's coming back. It is coming back, because literally today's the first day of my summer break. And the school year is still like I'm definitely still processing all of that we learned and struggled through during this past year of COVID. And Denisha was talking about learning loss, and we are definitely pushing back against that idea all the time. That deficit-based language, wasn't okay before COVID. It definitely isn't okay now. And it really, that deficit view of home learning. So one of the things that happened this school year is kids had more time to be learning at home. So actually a lot of them got to play more than they would have at school, which is kind of interesting to think about. And another thing that happened was teachers and families. I mean, we always have been collaborative with our families. That's been a part of our school, but we took it to a whole new level, right, during this COVID time, because kids were at home learning, and parents and family members were just more a part of the learning than ever before. The conversations about those open-ended questions that Kathy was talking about. So helping families to learn how to ask those open-ended questions to kind of get the most out of the home play was something that we were thinking about. I would say, one of the other things that Kathy talked about was meaningful learning, and that's something that was true pre-pandemic and will continue to be important. And the shift that we were making at our school is to really think about identity and belonging and how that connects to engagement and learning, and especially because we're 3-year-olds through 8th grade, and so that those themes of identity and belonging become really important in the middle school years for sure. And what we knew in terms of our teaching is that to teach across differences, that the teachers had to really be thinking about their own identity. And so that's some of the work that we've been doing because of the equity piece, the culturally responsive teaching that you were talking about, Kathy. We've realized it's moving beyond the multicultural text, and that's important, but also really having those deeper connections to the students to really have meaningful academic learning and to build their own agency, right? Which is what you're talking about, right? It's self-motivated students are realizing they have the agency, they have ideas, they have questions, right? They're not just giving the right answer, they are actually asking good questions. So that's something that we're excited to think about more when we get back in person. We were only in person, some of the kids never came back for in-person learning, and some kids came back for the last 6 weeks of school. So that that collaboration, that dialogue, we are craving that. I do have to say, the teachers were super creative, especially even with the younger ones, getting the kids to be able to collaborate on Zoom. Oh my goodness, some of our teachers realized if they turned off their own video and muted themselves and they were just listening in, then the kids started talking to each other and building with each other. And it was kind of this amazing thing. So that creativity, that problem solving that our teachers had came into real play during COVID. I have a lot more to say. I can talk about how we had to take standardized tests when we came back into in-person learning. I know we have we want this precious time together, and we did have to take them. So we can talk about that later, but I'll pass it on to Wendy.
Hi. Hi, so excited to be here. I feel like I'm in the middle of a rainbow, we started out with Kathy and then the rainbow arced and arced and arced. And I feel like I get to be in that rainbow, which is I'm so thankful for. And for me, play is children learning, but it's not so much that. It's figuring out who we are. It's figuring out how I relate to you. It's figuring out how we be in beloved community. How do we do that? And this pandemic, this time, deepened that learning. Kathy, some of your examples very much related to what we felt like we did this year and how we used both the outdoors and culture to deepen that. And so the first thing I'd like to talk about is what we refer to as the new architecture of education at Maple Street. And so before the pandemic hit, we had Hurricane Sandy years ago, right? And when I was listening to NPR on the radio, I learned that the strongest buildings were actually not those buildings made out of the strongest steel. They were what? They were those buildings that moved. They were those buildings that swayed. They were those buildings that like met the children where they were at. And I was like, whoa, that's the education I want to be. I want to be not that building that's stiff and rigid, but that playing place where we move with the wind, with the weather. So the first thing I would say is to recover, be that new architecture, move with that new weather and wind. The second thing I would love to say is that, you know, what got us through is culture and community. First, that park, Prospect Park, whoa. Thank you to Lenape Land. Thank you to Prospect Park. We would not have made it through this pandemic without you. And Kathy, I was thinking, you know, like how you were talking about the grocery store and adding things, but just like being in the park and meeting the dogs and the birders and all those people, they teach us how to relate, how to connect, how to build community, how to be with each other. I'm sure scientists will study those skills, but for me, I just see children light up and really move from practice to theory, like really move from watching children. And as you say, I don't know if it's being a guide, but really being a witness to learning and to joy. And doing this both in a way that's using the park to recover, but also recognizing equity as central to it and anti-racism as central to it. And for myself, I'm a white person, recognizing white accountability and my part in white supremacy. So doing all of that with children. And for that, you know, it looked like building culture and community. And just to give you an example, and how do children do it? They do it so much better than we do. So Shelley Nicole Jefferson came to Juneteenth, and look her up, her music's amazing. But she came to Juneteenth, and the children, like she's saying, we shall not be moved. And the children moved. They were like, yes, we are going to move. We are going to be ourselves. We are going to be free. And to me, that was the play. That was how we recover. We move. We dance. We work together. And then the last thing that we have to do to recover. So, you know, be flexible, culture and community. And the last thing is to build coalitions. I got to build this coalition. And the Black and brown leaders are beginning to be front and center. And I hope they are the front and center full leaders. And in this coalition, all of us recognized that we are not competition, we are comrades. And if we do not work together, we will not be trusted by the people who think they know what education is. And if we do work together, if we are bound together in play and beloved community, then we can do the rest of the rainbow together. So thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, Geraldine and Caleris. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I knew in my mind when I was putting the panel together that you three would be awesome and would bring it. And I'm delighted that Kathy really got us going, thinking about how do we rethink what's happening, right? Because what's happening wasn't working. And I think we all know that, right? And so in this push to return to what we had before with now new deficit thinking that our kids are behind, right? I liked how Kathy said there's going to be a lot of variability, right? Because we know it was a changing year, right? But we can't believe that all children are going to come in on a deficit, right? We have to capitalize on what the children are going to bring to us as well, too. So again, remember, please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, and we're going to get to those in a little bit. I did want us to talk a little bit about, you know, what you all talked about, this importance of what's happening in your own schools, right? CPE1, the family connection, also working with families, Geraldine and Wendy, and the culture. Can you talk a little bit about what do you see as a parent, as a teacher leader, as a director? Like, what are some of the obstacles to rethinking this, to doing all of this work? I think it's important that we name some of these obstacles and maybe one way that you've seen that you've been successful or that you've tried to deal with it, right? Because I think there are many obstacles to doing this work, to building this relationship with families, to rethinking education for these 21st century skills. So I'd like to hear from your experiences, what are the obstacles and what have you found to be a good way to kind of push back against them? And anyone can start and go first. We'll just keep it open.
I can start. I think it's the language we use. It's definitely impregnated in the most vulnerable communities. Today, for example, we had a press conference because we're fighting for an equitable budget from the city council here in New York City, where we're getting $7 billion for education. And we had some folks talk about, what immigrant communities need and English language learners. And the conversation was extended day, Saturday school, just all the things that are academically related. And part of me was like, oh my word, here are our most vulnerable communities, children that have not been in a school building for a year and a half. And the first thing we're going to tell them is that you have to come to school on Saturday. And not really think about, how is it that we're going to make them feel comfortable back in a school building when a lot of them have lost multiple family members. I have students in my district that discussed and described the anxiety that they get coming into a school building. And those are students that are 5th and 6th grade. I can't imagine what a 4 or 5-year-old will feel if they lost a grandparent or a parent due to COVID, and now they're in a school building with strangers. And if they're my kid in kindergarten would run away from folks he didn't trust and hide behind the black curtain so nobody would find him. And so we have to start really engaging our communities in conversations like this, where we change that language, where we talk about what our kids deserve, where we talk about the fact that we are in a space where we have the ability and opportunity to really change what people consider and think are the standards. Because a lot of those standards, as Wendy has talked about, doesn't necessarily apply to all communities. And so what do these schools look like? One of the reasons that Central Park East 1 was created was because progressive education was not created for Black and brown students, right? It was that concept of freedom in the classroom, that concept of self-directed learning was not what we describe Black and brown kids as, or that they had the ability to do it. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had a school leader that basically was Black, brown, and poor kids need more authoritarian teachers. What are you people doing? And we had our own struggles. So we are in communities that believe in that deficit mindset, have so much internalized racism that they don't understand that we actually have the ability to free our children and move towards abolitionist teaching and an abolitionist community and society. So we must engage in these conversations. We must have our Black and brown teachers at the forefront of this movement so that families can begin to trust the system, because one of the reasons Black and brown families are fleeing from schools and deciding to homeschool is because they've experienced all of the overt racism that could occur in classrooms. And I think it's important to have open conversations where we acknowledge what's happened historically so that we can move forward to having these schools where our children are centered.
If I can a little, that was such a really, really important point. And I wouldn't, I'm wondering if it's fair to say, these schools weren't created for everyone, or that they haven't represented everyone. As a scientist to me, a human brain is a human brain and a child is a child. And everybody learns by doing. I mean, I still learn by doing rather than just watching or sitting passively on a lump. And so I think you're right. What we need is maybe more representation, and also say also we need to communicate better. Because you're right, it's when people realize the power of the system, and part of the problem that I encountered in the power of the system was, and I don't mean the power of the system imposing, I mean the power of a playful system, is in the way we talk about it. You know, people seem to think of play as frivolity, and it's as far from frivolity as you can get if it's done well. Now, it can be frivolous, but I think a lot of times it's not. It can be woven in to be reflective and really socially and academically rich. So what I've done in my work is to try to create a vocabulary and a way of talking about it that, at least for us, has gotten more buy-in from various groups, from people of color, from people of many different cultural and ethnic groups, because they're seeing now, oh, my kids won't just be playing, right? They will be getting something out of this. And if that's what we have to do, then, you know, maybe we change the way we talk about it and help people see the power of it. I don't know, it's just a thought and maybe a question as well.
Thanks,
I
Kathy.
think by design, the system by design hurts Black and brown children. All you need to do is get a handful of daycare directors together and see who's policed and see who's allowed to be free, and that's all you need. And so, like, it needs to be dismantled before we rebuild it.
Yes.
Play in the forefront.
But what I guess I'm saying is I don't think the progressive system necessarily, or let me say playful learning, I don't want to, progressive has all these other meanings. I don't want to, you know, it can mean so much, but I don't think playful learning on its face is meant for one group or the other. I think all school is systemically racist, if I may say so. I think it doesn't match generally the people who are in it. And that's just gotta change. It's gotta change absolutely for people from under-resourced environments, but for everyone, because it's just a terrible system.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work we have to do is remembering, right, that the system wasn't designed for all students, and it took legal battles to get us there, right? And it's only designed for one type of learner, right? The one, you know, you think of the child that's sitting perfect at the desk, answering all the questions, right? Like, that's who the system really wants. And every other child who doesn't do that, well, is kind of kicked out of that system or told they need to change or something is wrong with them, right? And primarily that's, you know, trying to mold all learners into what typically is this white middle class ideal child, right? That most children aren't. And how do we push back against that? There are some questions about this idea of play, and I think people are grappling with this, you know, guided play. We have a lot of free play advocates. I'm a huge free play, true play advocate. I think there's a lot of power in there. I think play is learning because that's the state of being that children are in, that you can't help it, you can't separate it. Even if they're daydreaming, right, they're learning, right? Even if they're twirling the same thing over and over and over again, right, they're doing it. So some folks have asked about the guided play feels like an interruption of that learning. So maybe while you're back with us, Kathy, maybe you can talk about, I can read the question directly, but it came from Rixa, and she said, I'm a play advocate and would love to hear why we should support guided play. It seems to me that saying that we should make a castle is imposing our interest on the child. Wouldn't it be better to ask a wonder question to the children? What can you build with these thoughts? Or even simply listening to what the children are curious about and then facilitating the experience.
Well, remember what you just described, my dear, is guided play. When you are listening to what the child is interested in and you are facilitating the response to help them go farther, you have defined guided play. So I don't think we're disagreeing at all. Let me tell you where I will disagree with play advocates who don't make distinctions in the types of play. And this comes from a research base. There are a number of movements that entered into education, particularly I'll say for 4 and 5-year-olds. For younger children, it's maybe less of an issue, where the question is, should we, and maybe we shouldn't, this is a question, should we be introducing children to literature, to books? You know, in 25% of American homes, there are 10 or fewer books that are age appropriate for young children. What do we think? Do we think that's okay? Because the data show that for those children who come from homes where they're not read to, or those children who don't have experience in whether it's playing, acting out, whatever, in literacy of some way, those children will have a hard time catching up. And when it comes to 3rd and 4th grade, when you move from learning to read to reading to learn, what we see is what's called the 4th grade slump. And it's occurred in study after study after study. So one of the reasons that there is so much investment right now, of course, we're talking right now, not a year ago, in early childhood. And by the way, one of the reasons that there's so much bipartisan support, and it's one of the few areas where that's true, is because if we can help those children, that 25%, get some exposure to culturally relevant books and culturally relevant experiences that build literacy and understanding, then when they enter public school, wherever they are, they will not be at a disadvantage, and we won't have to talk about loss at all. So the idea is to ensure that everybody has a leg up in a way that is equitable and accessible. So we talk about the term guided play, not because play doesn't have value. Please, we've included free play in it too. It's free play and guided play. But I want to be really clear about the distinction. If the distinction is that you have a learning goal in mind, and you might not, you may say, I just want pure recess. I know I need more pure recess. But if you have a learning goal in mind, what is now completely clear from the scientific literature is that you will not get there through free play alone. Now we can talk about why. So let me just give you 2 seconds on why from the science, and then open it back to you, Denise, and I think Aelris, you want to jump in too here. It turns out that to actually learn stuff, it can't be as open-ended as run in the backyard, which is a fine thing to do. And you may learn about twigs and you may learn about leaves if you know to look for them, okay? If there's an adult who says, hey, look at that, there's different kinds of trees and there's different kinds of leaves, but otherwise you're not going to come out reading. So why did direct instruction ever work in the first place? Because honestly, it's an awful system. But what it does is it constrains the focus enough that it allows people to focus on the right dimensions as opposed to the wrong dimensions for getting to the learning goal. So if you have a learning goal in mind, you need to have a way to adjust the environment or to have a guide at the side, not a sage on the stage, who can help you to get there. Does that make sense? It has to constrain it a little. What we've done in guided play is give the agency back to the child, allow for a light touch nudge so that it is still quite playful in the way we're introducing it, but not a free-for-all, because the data just don't support it if and only if there's a learning goal in mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does make sense. I know there's just difference of opinions. I'm thinking of all my true play advocate friends who would say that a part of the shift is then it's not so much like something is happening while the kids are playing, and teachers need to be the ones to recognize that, observe that, and document it. and then that's the learning that's happening, and how do you reflect that? But it's two different things. It's different to go in open and say, what are the kids doing, how can I support that, and then say, I have a learning goal, how can I get you to meet this learning goal, right? So I think it's just it's a spectrum. I always see play on the spectrum from no play, where children don't have the freedom and space and time to play, to true free play, where children are free to do as they please with materials that have very limited functioning, and then everything in between, which is, centers, guided play, playful, like all of those things, right? And how do we take up that spectrum, right? And how do we make space for all of the different things that are going to support children as well, too?
I think that's right. That's your last sentence is the thing that I think strikes me the most, which is just a very simple question I would ask everyone out there, including the panelists. What do we want from the end? What's the goal? So when somebody graduates from our preschool, what should they be able to do? And I would argue it's a suite of skills, not just content, and that we need to give children the opportunity to do that whole suite. So collaboration, noticing branches, all that is wonderful and important. We need to know how to observe it and build it. But for many kids, if we do them, I believe the injustice of not exposing them to a book or blocks or spatial rotation or whatever, then they might turn out to be at a disadvantage at the next stage. So that's at least where my definition is coming from.
Can
Thank
I jump
you.
in for a second, Denise?
Yeah.
It's just all my many years in education. I'm just reflecting on how this discussion we've had since I came into this field 50 years ago, and it never gets resolved, because it's an ongoing discussion. Maybe that's the value. We keep talking about it, thinking about it, observing kids, asking ourselves, what is our role as educators? How do we do what we do? Kathy, I think it's enormously valuable that you contribute science to it and research, and that we know more about the brain. And I think those things contribute to our awareness of how do we think about the teacher's role. And I'm also a big free play advocate, and I understand this idea of guided play. I'm just speaking personally. I don't think I'm right or wrong. I just think it's my own experience, even bringing up my sons and knowing how much I did that natural stuff of, hey, look at the twig over here. Well, not every kid gets that. They don't get that sort of natural input that might come easily to some parents. Someone like me who's like a born educator, that's what I did. But maybe some kids need to hear suggestions from teachers, and if they're made in the way that you're describing, which is really cued into kids' interests, and letting those interests guide the teacher in how he or she is offering suggestions or extensions or whatever you want to say to the play, and not really co-opting it, which is a total danger. I think there's room there for us as educators to think about how we can have a role in children's play that isn't 100% hands-off, but doesn't also co-play or get involved directly as a playmate. And it's anyway, there's not an easy answer, but it's a lot of meat for reflection. So
Thank you for sharing that, Nancy. And I agree. And again, it's the spectrum. Like I say, look, I've been in the schools. We've all been in the schools. We've seen nothing going on play related. I would love to see more guided play in our classrooms, and not just our pre-K and K. Let's see guided play in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, sixth grade through high school, right? Like we have to really keep thinking about that, right?
Yep. Actually use it in my college classes for what it's worth.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We should be doing in that project-based learning, that problem-based learning, that experiential learning that builds upon all of what we're talking about and how important it is as well, too. We did have another question about, where did it go? I didn't dismiss that one. Someone did ask for resources. I don't know what happened to that one. Here it is. We'll be helping. This is from Michelle, our good friend Michelle Gunnarsson in Chicago. We'll be helping a group of Chicago educators transition to playful learning platform in the primary grades. What is your favorite beginning resource for a teacher working with these grades? So we just talked about that, about explaining. Oh, Kathy, you answered her directly there. I see that now. And so to go to ultimateplaybook.org to look for some resources as well there. One of the things we do at Sarah Lawrence, where I work, is in our dual certification, we think about, play space and that kind of active learning in the older grades. And we work with schools like Ella Baker, right, and other schools like CPE1 that have this work time included with the older grades. And I think, Geraldine, you also have that included at your school, right? So this basis that we have to move out of the idea that we're only doing this with up until 5, and then all of a sudden it's like structured, heavy first grade, which doesn't really serve any child well as either. And let's see, we have another question here. Do you think instruction in early childhood education should solely be play-based? What about direct instruction? There must be some aspects that cannot be replaceable. After we were just having this discussion back and forth, I would venture to say it really does depend on what you're trying to do, right? When I teach my pre-service teachers, I said, yeah, some things don't get learned through exploration and through play. If you're trying to get them to memorize multiplication tables, you might have to get a little more concrete with that and do that in a more direct instruction way. But for early childhood, right, I think there are more opportunities, should be more child initiated and child guided and child led, right? Because that is really important, because we want to develop that idea that children are wanting to learn, right? I feel like because I got so much experience to play and to be hands-on, I was driven to learn and to want to explore. And I don't see that with the younger generations because they're not given that time. Everything is scripted and taught to them. So they're naturally not seeing themselves as, hungry for knowledge and hungry for learning. It's something that's done to them and they kind of tune out from it, right? And so how do we bring out that natural curiosity, that natural drive for learning? I think we have to let children lead the way as much as possible, and especially in the early childhood years, so that it just becomes a natural way of thinking, right? You don't even realize that you're doing, this is just who you are, this is how you engage in the world, that way of being that I think you talked a little bit about, Wendy, right? That I think is super important.
Well, and just to add, one way we check on that natural play and where it goes in either guided play or authentic play is if two things happen, we get really excited. The first is if something gets turned into something we don't expect. Like, we were like, wow, right? Something we didn't expect. If that castle turns into a refrigerator, we're like, whoa, nice. And the second thing is if it goes home. If that child goes to that grocery store or to that park and checks in and that goes home. So those two things, we know we're doing deep, gorgeous play.
I would add, Wendy, that what I listen for is when I hear students, kids say, I have an idea. When I hear that, I have an idea to another student and they're figuring like that, I'm like, all right, things are happening.
Totally. And you all could probably add 5 more things for sure. But it's just like, what do we look for when we hit that zone of gorgeousness?
Awesome. Yeah. And that's part of it. It's like tuning in to what the child needs, right? And what the child's thinking about and capitalizing on that in different ways, right? And then knowing your child. Some children need a lot of scaffolding and support. Other children need you to step back and let them be, right? That's part of this whole process that I think when we trust our teachers, right? We understand that, right? But I think a lot of us, like to Clarissa's point earlier, a lot of parents don't feel the trust at the school because they don't really feel the school is working for them in the way that they talk about their children and talk about what they're supposed to have. There's not a lot of trust building there. And I think some of that's intentional, right? We intentionally don't want sometimes teachers and parents to be trusted because then they're all going to turn around and question, what the heck are we doing a standardized test for? If the teacher doesn't believe it and the parent doesn't believe it, right? We're going to be more unified in our resistance to some of those things, and it's going to pop up.
And just to add in the recovery, real quick, we just, in terms of using our empathy, if people said to you, Caliris, you're 33 years old, by the time you're 34 years old, or however you are, by the time whatever, you have to meet this and this and this and this and this and this and this, and then you had a pandemic year and they said, well, you have to meet it twice as fast, you would feel awful. All of us as grown-ups would feel awful if somebody told us that after our hardest years, we had to meet these goals way faster and way less fun. And so I guess how we recover is how do we help kids play and feel okay? Because we wouldn't want to do that. We don't want to meet goals fast and harshly.
I'm in academia, so that's exactly what happens and what's going to happen. So, but yeah, I think what's also really important in the space is that folks think that free play or play in general is like a free for all, right? But part of that engagement with the teacher is, just like Denisha mentioned, observations are so important and documentation is so important. You learn so much about a child just sitting with them and watching them, how they engage with other students, how they engage with their teachers, what books they're interested in. At Central Park East 1, for example, there's no such thing as leveled reading. Like, why would you level books and just tell kids, like, this is the box that you can choose books from? Third graders can still use a picture book, to do a lot of things when it comes to being creative and engaging. As I said in the chat, work time is central, but once kids transition from second and third grade, they do more project-based learning. So it's not just work time, it's project time. And now you're spending 2 weeks on something that you build on and you take a deeper dive and you show kids, like, you can do this kind of research and integrate it into your thoughts and your ideas to have a final project. And so it evolves, but you still give them that autonomy. And you still have teachers engage in that autonomy in terms of how you're going to guide them in those conversations, while still giving them the freedom to engage in that work. And so Denisha's absolutely right. Play can extend well beyond the age of 5, and can still be conducive to some of the most productive learning environments that we can provide for students.
I just want to add, though, that, just one mini cautionary note, because it's been thrown up at me so many times. Not only have I been part of teams working really, really hard to train people on how to do this, but also in commentary from many people who have been trained in education and from parents. It's not as if you don't have to climb a lot of hurdles, if you know what I mean, to create classrooms like this. We're all talking about this as if it's really easy to do. And to be honest with you, it's really hard to do. And it's, you don't have just one kid with one interest in unicorns. You know what I mean? You have the kid who's interested in how they're going to grow up and be a baseball player, and you have the kid who's interested in unicorns, and you have the kid who's interested in. So learning how to do this and accept the multitude of different experiences and richness that our children bring to the class is one thing that is not a short order, it's a tall order for people to do. And the second tall order is how you talk to parents about this, because while we're all really fine in saying it'll be fine, and I know it will be, our kids are going to be fine, especially if we're kind enough not to sit them down and drill and kill them to death. If we actually help them be the human beings we know they can be, the curious, wonderful, glorious beings we know they are, then I think they'll come out of this all right and interact with other kids just fine. But parents are worried out there. They're very worried. They've heard the language of loss and they're scared. And so part of what we have to do is, as I said before, is we have to think of a communication strategy. Even if we're all convinced of something, we need to say it will be okay and show parents how this will prepare children for where they need to go.
That is a really good point. We had a couple questions about how do we get the federal government to change its focus on Common Core? How do we bring the importance of play into state and districts planning for social emotional learning? Because, and this idea that people know that this is what we want, but we're so focused on readiness and accountability that we're missing this piece, right? That we're not able, and again, it's the teachers who feel that they have to cover a ton of content, right? We know that pressure that you're told you get to get the content, or you're got to get these test scores up, or you're going to not be able to stay operating and doing the things you want, fear of takeover. And then it's the parents' fear that their child is already at a disadvantage for whether socioeconomic reasons or because they're marginalized by their racial identity, that are worried that their children are not getting the most out of this and they're going to be behind. So we have all of these fears, right? So I'd like us to think about in our last time together, how do we move forward past these fears? How do we capitalize on, surviving this pandemic, coming in out of it, having our kids ready to return to schools, and how do we take that fear and change it, right, into trust or into advocacy, into the work that we're doing, which I think is really important.
Well, some of the answer to that is knowledge and overcoming fear with some knowledge. And that's been one of our biggest struggles. There's been this play-learning dichotomy that's gone on in education forever. And we've had such a difficult time trying to explain how play is learning. It's very difficult to do because when you look at kids playing without some help and training or insight or whatever, adults don't find it easy to see where the learning is actually happening there. We're going to have Pasi Sahlberg with us tomorrow, and he's a major education leader from Finland, and they have the most remarkable education system, and he's co-authored a new book called Let the Children Play. But in Finland, they don't start, formal instruction until kids are 7. And it's really a play-based early childhood experience that children in Finland have, and they have had traditionally the highest, standardized test scores in the world. So, it's worth, we have to do a lot of education, and also we have to acknowledge there's big political forces in the United States that are influencing education policy, big billionaire money that pushes a standards-based, test-driven education model. And we have to face that and take that on and confront it, because that is a major obstacle for us.
Well, and they push that model, and then they also push a scarcity model where there should only be one teacher for 30 children. So it's a little bit, right, the models don't match at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Pasi, and I'm sure, and Bill will talk a lot, there is the global education reform movement, right, that we've seen, and it's actually coming. Like, they're trying to keep everything play-based in Finland, but there are conservative forces there as well, trying to take this idea of public education and turn it into something that produces better worker bees, I guess. They're not happy with the quality of the workers coming out because, goodness forbid you get children, learn to explore their creativity, and now they don't want to work in your horrible job for the rest of their lives, right? They want to do more exciting things, right? But there is a global push, right? And we see that everywhere. When I was in China and visiting Anji China at a conference on play, and Ms. Chung talked about how these forces are happening, right? And it's really just changing access, like who gets to teach, and the role of early childhood educators and diminishing that role. I was in a conversation earlier today with one of our board members, our advisory board members, Marie Sykes and others, about this dichotomy between care and education, and how a lot of people feel that care is not worthy of a full pay, right? Because it doesn't take a lot of skills. And I'm like, but it does actually, because custodial care anybody can do. Obviously, I can watch your child and keep them safe. But then care through education, through early childhood, developmental care in the sense that you're helping guide a child's development is a very much a skill-based thing, right? That most people don't recognize. Some of us talk to young children just to hear ourselves talk. Some of us talk to young children because we're building skills, right? We're helping them, give them language and give them voice and showing them the power of language to do these things, right? That's, you have to, some people don't know that, and they have to have that explained to them. So how do we break through these traditional dichotomies that are keeping us apart, right? Like, there's a lot of people now that are arguing that, no play in classrooms, kids don't need it, or just give them recess, while other people might say, right, like, but this is how children recover. This is how you build resiliency in the face of trauma. And we know COVID was traumatic for a lot of kids, Thousands of children are returning to school who lost a parent or a close family member through COVID. How are they going to come into this space and be told to learn without giving a chance to process what happened to them in a community of people who care about them and care about what happened to them, and making time for that when we feel the pressure of the standardized testing? So it's a lot still out there, but I feel like, yeah, having this discussions, being open and honest with people, sharing what works and what doesn't work is a really important way to do that. And let's see, we had, I think those are most of the questions we got addressed. A couple popped in, but they were more of comments. And we're going to continue this conversation, as Nancy said, tomorrow. We thought tomorrow was about play, but when you talk about learning in early childhood, guess what you're talking about? Play. But tomorrow is a really focused conversation on the research on play and also advocating for play. We're going to have a guest speaker, Cassie Creswell, who recently in Illinois got play mandated into the legislation. The right to play bill was passed after going back and forth in the Senate and the House with the state. And so we're going to hear all about that because advocacy is a big part of the work we do here at Defending the Early Years, and we want to support you guys on the ground doing the work to make sure that the spaces we have are good for children, are developmentally appropriate for children, that support them in many different ways. And so we're definitely going to continue this conversation as well too. So any last thoughts before we wrap up for our time together today? Kathy, I see you got your hand.
Yeah, Denise, I just wanted to tell you that I'm happy to say that the state of New Hampshire has also written it in. It is now law that all the kindergartens have to be play-based kindergartens. And we're using some of our training to train all of the teachers and create coaches on how to do the hard work of becoming play-based kindergartens.
Awesome. That is amazing. I did see this question. They were asking about green spaces, classroom structures, group size. Don't we need some of these things for relationship and connection to play? I will say you need three things for play: time, space, and freedom, right? You need to give children time, unstructured time, 20 minutes, not 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours all day, right? And you need space. You do. It's nice to have more space than less space, but children will play in any type of space. If you've ever watched them, they will start playing anywhere. But the more space you can give them to expand that play, it's really important. And then you need freedom. They need the freedom to engage in ways that drive them and that interact them. And if it's always being told, no, do this, no, do this, no, do that, right? Then it's not that free play that we talked about earlier. So I'll offer those things. A lot of people, everyone who has a child knows this, right? It's not the toys that's exciting them as much as the box that came in, right? We don't need a ton of toys and materials, and it's actually the open-ended materials that are best, the loose parts, the things that have no one way to put together, and they allow them to use their symbolic representation, and other things are also really powerful. And I saw that as well.
And that was the best part of COVID: the sticks, the mud, that was it. That was that's what got me through with these kids in this community, was sticks and muds and objects.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely the imaginative play that happens. I wrote about it when COVID first started. I imagine if I had kids playing my house, what we would do, right? No need for toys. Like, I bet you can build a fort out of my old law school textbooks. Let's see you get at it, right? I bet you there's so much you can do. It's just taking things out of the cabinets and seeing what you can create, right? But it's really that freedom that a lot of kids don't get in our school setting, right? We don't encourage that type of creativity. And so how can we make space for that? And really, it helps us to start it at home, right? Give them that time at home and show the teachers how much they're engaged and how much they're getting out of this. I think will also be really helpful as well too.
I just want to say something about testing since Geraldine brought it up. Here in New York, parents actually had to opt into the state tests, and we took advantage of this opportunity. Parents should know, and unfortunately here in New York, it's kind of like taboo for you to talk to parents about this if you're a teacher or a principal. But you have a choice. Your child does not have to take a state exam. And by law, schools cannot use them in the detriment of the child. So you have opted your child out of the state test. It should not impact their admissions to different schools, impact the way that your child is assessed. Children do not need to take the state test in order to be promoted to the next grade. So these are conversations that we were finally having during COVID. We have a commissioner that doesn't believe in standardized testing. And so we're seeing a shift also in how high school students are being assessed. So PBATs are being brought back. for students. And so I think that mentality is, oh my God, I need my kindergartner to be prepared to take this standardized test in 3rd grade. No, they don't have to take it ever. We have to remind folks. And the other thing is that we're living under a system that embodies white supremacy. And so all of the things that we've been talking about are all characteristics of white supremacy culture, right? That sense of urgency, that perfectionism, the written word is anything and everything. No, that's not what we need in order to be free, creative, energy-driven, direction-driven human beings. And if you study anything about motivation and engagement and joy, you will see that none of these things are what's going to move a child forward or the brain forward in terms of creating those consolidated circuits that will allow you to be a productive human being.
And Claire said it might destroy our earth.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is like an amazing way to end this conversation. I am so grateful. I want to thank Kathy. Thank you so much for your opening keynote. Susan and Audrey, I don't know if I think you left us already, but thank you so much. Nancy, thank you for welcoming us. And to our panelists, Kaliris, Geraldine, and Wendy, thank you all so much for being here. I want to give a quick shout out to my co-director, Blakely Bundy. I'm always on the face on the screen and no one gets to see Blakely behind the screens, but she works very hard with me. We also have our marketing person, Catherine, who helped, and our wonderful team at, I'm messing up the name of the studio, Jiro and Felicia. I'm just going to call you Jiro and Felicia, who are running our tech. Thank you guys all so much. Tomorrow is day 2. We're coming to you at 4 p.m. with a conversation with me and Nancy and Poppy Solberg and Bill Doyle. You don't want to miss that. And then a 2nd hour conversation with Kathy Croswell about advocating for play. And then we have our day 3 is going to be a keynote from the amazing Takima Bunch-Smith and a panel with amazing educators and activists, Lelania Garcia, Ashley Brailsford, Megan Madison, and myself, really talking about early childhood and liberation, and you don't want to miss that. So we hope to see you back again tomorrow and Wednesday. Thank you.
So long, everybody. Thanks for being with us.